Hey guys, I'm beloved political commentator Matt Lewis, back for another exciting episode of Matt Lewis and the News. I want to start out by thanking you for listening, and especially those of you who support us on Patreon. It makes a huge difference, and if you don't already support us, you can do so. You can get one of these cool Matt Lewis and the News t-shirts and a Matt Lewis and the News mug. Just go to patreon.com/Matt Lewis. I also want to give a special thank you to the Leadership Institute, where we are taping today's podcast, for sponsoring this episode. LI is a great organization. I interned here, actually worked here for 4 years. It is America's premier training organization. If you ever wanted to learn how to get a job on Capitol Hill, how to go on television, how to win a campaign, or just be more effective in public policy, the Leadership Institute is the place to go. Visit them online at leadershipinstitute.org. Our guest today is TK Coleman. He's co-founder and education director of Praxis, a 12-month program that combines a 6-month professional development boot camp with a 6-month paid startup apprenticeship and lifetime access to the Praxis network and events. He's also the director of entrepreneurial education at the Foundation for Economic Education, and he's a prolific writer and speaker with a singular mission to awaken people to their own creative power. TK describes himself as an entrepreneur first and a motivator second. We describe him as a friend. TK Coleman, welcome back to the news.
Matt, thanks for having me here, man. I'm excited.
Tell us a little bit about you. How did you get here today?
How did I get here?
Route 66 doesn't count.
There are so many ways I could talk about how I arrived to this point, but since I prefer to discuss ideas rather than spout out biographical facts about myself, I'll start with ideas. So for me, I grew up in Chicago, Illinois, and my father is a pastor. And he's been a pastor for nearly 50 years. And I grew up in a context where my childhood was filled with listening to sermons, reading the Bible together as a family, talking with other pastors and preachers and missionaries. And there was a lot of focus on what it takes to live a meaningful life, what it means to live an eternal quality of life, rather than merely looking at eternity as something quantitative that begins when we die. And there are two very important lessons that my father taught me that shape everything that I do. Lesson number one was that work is a gift, not a curse. It's a product of creation, not a consequence of the fall. That we are not here to work because we have to, because we are victims of things that need to be done. We are here to work because this is the means through which we express our creativity. We are here to extend the creative process that was began, right? Work is how we choose to be the image and likeness of God on this earth. And so this whole idea of discovering and doing what makes you come alive is the most important thing on earth. It's not just, something that's optional. And my father taught me that your primary job is to figure out how you're going to contribute to making this world better than it was before you got here. It's not about finding your place. It's about creating your place. So that insight, that upbringing by itself explains everything that I do with Praxis, right? Because it's all about helping people in an area where we tend to feel most disempowered, which is work. We spend 2/3 of our life oriented around work. 1/3 of the day at work, another third of the day getting enough rest so we can have energy when we do go to work. We feel underpaid, underappreciated, overworked. We feel like we're not getting enough meaning. And I want to help people solve that problem. I want to help people find fulfillment and freedom in that space. The second thing that my father taught me is that true power doesn't come from politics. It comes from faith, creativity, and self-ownership. When we learned the story of Moses and Pharaoh, we were taught very early on that Pharaoh was the politician in this story. Moses was the guy with no political power. And yet, he is the one who led an entire nation to freedom, not through the political process, but through the willingness to bet on himself, through the willingness to have a radical vision and to invest himself fully in that vision, even in the face of skepticism, even against all odds. He wasn't a guy that was particularly gifted. When God says, this is what you're going to do, Moses objects. I have a stuttering problem. He gives a bunch of reasons for why he's not worthy of it. But yet he was willing to step out and take some chances on faith, and he was able to change the world. And I believe that the way we arrive at a free society is not by waiting on the right politician to get into office, but by convincing everyday, ordinary individuals that the world changes by each of us voting for ourselves, by banking on our own potential. And this explains the work that I do with Fee. I have a video series and a series of seminars called Revolution of One. And my tagline is that in order for a free society to be realized, the revolution must be individualized. And it's all about how personal responsibility and self-ownership is a superior mechanism, not just an alternative, but a superior mechanism to politics at creating a freer society and changing the world. So those two aspects of my upbringing are what shape what I do in terms of my career today. And we can take this conversation in any direction from there.
So it sounds like, I mean, this is a philosophy your dad instilled in you.
Yeah.
And it was basically, the world is tough, but you have to hustle because most men live lives of quiet desperation, as I think it was Thoreau said. And Studs Terkel wrote about how work is horrible. And there is that. My dad was a prison guard for 30 years, right?
Yeah.
But it sounds like your dad basically said, you have to hustle and work hard to create your own reality and to have agency over your own future.
Absolutely. And the world isn't just tough, it's inherently unfair. And it's unfair to each of us in its own unique way. Pain and suffering are irreducibly particular, right? Like there may be people that have advantages that you don't have, but they also have private sufferings that you don't have, and vice versa, right? And in order to get anywhere in life, we have to start with the reality of what our lives are, and some of that is going to be fair, but we have to do the best we can with what we have, not because we don't deserve better, but because there is no way to get better unless you take responsibility for that process.
And the interesting thing is that what you're talking about does have a political component, right?
Absolutely.
I think there are people on the left who would say, don't listen to what TK is saying, because if everyone buys into that, what about all the people who can't compete, who are being left behind, or because of structural racism or class warfare, whatever the case may be? But I've always felt like, at the micro level at least, if an individual believes he or she has no control over their future, that leads, it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it could lead to depression and all that. But if you believe that you can work hard and get ahead, that also will make you happier and probably more successful.
Yeah, you know, I've never bought into this business that we need to protect people from success stories so that they don't have unrealistic expectations and end up getting disappointed. You know, I remember there was an article written by a school teacher directed at the NBA All-Star Steph Curry. And the article was about, Steph Curry, please don't come speak at my school, because Steph Curry grew up wealthy. His father was in the NBA, and there was this idea of, hey, the kids at my school are poor and they don't have your advantages. And if you come talking to them about all the great things you've done and all the great things they can do, they're going to think they can be the next Steph Curry, and they don't have the advantages that you had. I have never been in support of this idea that because some people have disadvantages that others don't have, we need to make sure they don't hear about those success stories or be inspired by them. What we need to do is teach people how to think critically and creatively about how those success stories apply to their lives. If you tell me something about your life that you learned, the easiest thing for me to do is to figure out a way that it doesn't apply. I can say, yeah, but that was over in Kansas and I grew up in Chicago. Yeah, but that was in 1965 and I was in 1970. Yeah, but that was in the manufacturing industry and I'm in the entertainment industry. We can always find a way that it doesn't apply, but critical thinking is about finding the way that it does apply, right? Every statement, every piece of advice can be interpreted in a way that renders it dumb and useless. The goal of learning is to do the opposite, and we have to teach people how to do that. Here's the second thing about people who might say, well, don't listen to this because there are all these disadvantaged people over here. First of all, those disadvantaged people aren't going to be any better off by you compromising your own potential, right? So the idea that you need to be the best that you can become only increases if you believe in the existence of disadvantaged people. If you truly believe there are people that live an unfair life, then you really owe it to yourself and to this world to give them a real example of someone that can overcome incredible odds. Another thing too is this idea that we have the responsibility and the power to make the best of our lives, it doesn't mean that we all have the same ceiling. So for instance, if I get up and work out every day, I am never going to be LeBron James. But that's not a reason for avoiding the possibility of working out. I'm not working out in order to become equal to LeBron James. I'm working out to become the best that I can be. And the version of me that works out will never be better than LeBron, but it will always be better than the version of me that doesn't work out. So the question that we always have to ask is compared to what?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what makes you better at an individual level? And is it really worth abandoning those possibilities merely because it's not equal to someone else's? I say absolutely not. That's the most self-defeating proposition possible.
Yeah, I can just tell you from a personal standpoint, like when I was a little kid, I wanted to be a Major League Baseball player.
Yeah.
That didn't happen, but I think having that dream was good for me. I was inspired by movies like the Rocky movies, you know, the underdog, nobody believes in him. And obviously I didn't become a boxer, but I think that those movies helped me get to where I am today. And wherever that is, you know, whatever you're doing, it takes some amount of perseverance and a belief in yourself and overcoming. And, you know, I could have thrown myself into trying to become a professional boxer. It probably wouldn't have ended terribly well. But, you know, I had some fantasies. It's probably healthy to nourish that to a certain degree.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, one other thing I'll say, because here's one thing that I think the left is reacting to. It's not just the idea. Sometimes it's the tone, right? And I'm totally okay with this notion that we should try to communicate in a way that increases the likelihood of someone receiving what we have to say. So I'm not here to trigger anyone for the sake of having fun when people feel flustered by my words. I'm here to educate, I'm here to coach, I'm here to convince people that they have the permission and the power to be the predominant creative force in their own lives. So when people listen to these ideas, that's when I win. I don't win by making people cry, you know, or making people feel guilty.
Well, they believe, I mean, I'm sorry, but they believe that the deck is stacked, the game is rigged, and that these other people control the game, and they can keep us in our place by letting us have these naive dreams that someday we could be rich too, right? That's how you control the masses, by allowing them to believe that they'll be rich one day, and they see that, I think, as like it was what Marx said of Christianity, it's the opioid of the masses, that this is a way to basically keep people in check, keep them from rebelling if they knew what the game really was.
Yeah, so there are a few important issues here. First, I just want to point out that I haven't said anything about you can be rich or that you're going to achieve your dreams. I'm not here to preach a Disney message that says when you wish upon a star, it makes no difference who you are. Not only will you probably not achieve all your dreams, but you'll probably get crushed by life in ways that you can't imagine. So the question to me isn't, are there guarantees that I will get everything that I want if I work hard? The question is, what's the intelligent choice to make given the parameters that you just established? So the way you set the world up, I'm going to concede the farm, okay? I'm going to concede that we're being manipulated and that there are people who want us to dream so that they can control us and our whole life is being systematically oppressed. Let's concede that. The proper response then, is it to lay down and accept that as final, or is it to try hard to resist that by increasing our personal power? There's a video I saw of a gazelle that is being hunted by a lion, right? And there's a moment where the gazelle recognizes that the lion is there, okay? And the lion is so close, you know what's gonna happen. The lion is faster, it's stronger, it is absolutely over for this gazelle. And what does the gazelle do? The gazelle runs. Does it run because it has empirical evidence that it will succeed in getting away? It knows that the odds are against it, so it doesn't run for that reason. Does it run because it naively thinks that we live in a magical universe that's going to reward its faith? Absolutely not. It runs because that is the only intelligent option in that situation. It's the only alternative to lying down. So no matter what you're going through, maybe your life is really screwed up, but don't lay down. Don't lay down and accept that as final. Be like the gazelle and run like hell towards whatever possibilities you can see ahead of you. And even if you don't win, you will at least have lived a life that gave yourself a shot. Last thing on this. Wayne Dyer says, responsibility is not blame. Responsibility is the power to respond with ability. Just because you have disadvantages, just because you have a hard life, it doesn't mean that it's your fault. But it does mean that you are the one that has to take ownership for doing something about it. So I'm not here to tell anybody that if they have disadvantages that that's not true. Disadvantages do exist. Unfairness does exist. Oppression does exist, right? But the question is, what do we do about it? We don't lay down, but we fight. We fight for our freedom. Freedom isn't given.
One of the things you tell people, young people especially, is don't treat potential jobs like a potential spouse. What does that mean?
It means that marriage is a very wonderful institution. And if you are lucky enough to find somebody you want to live the rest of your life with and they feel the same, by all means, have at it. But the overwhelming majority of things in life are not optimized for that approach. You shouldn't treat most things like a marriage. And your career development is one of those things. And everywhere I go, I see people psyching themselves out, stressing themselves out, because when they go to a job interview or when they're evaluating a job offer or they're scouting out opportunities, they're looking for their one true love. They're looking for their soulmate. Now imagine how confused we would be if we went on a first date and you walked away and someone said, well, how'd you like that date? And you say, well, they seemed interesting and they seemed funny and the conversation went well, but I still have a lot of questions and I don't know if I want to spend the rest of my life with that person. Well, you should have a lot of questions. You shouldn't know if you should spend the rest of your life with that person. It was a first date. And the purpose of a first date isn't to find your one true love. It's to explore. It's to discover. It's to gather information. It's to see how it goes. And the question isn't, can I spend the rest of my life with this person? Will I be happy with them one day when I'm 50? The question is it worth a second date? Is it worth a second conversation? You know, did I have fun talking with them? And I think you should approach a job the same way. You cannot predict what you're going to want to do for the rest of your life. In fact, chances are, even if you think you know that information, you're wrong, because the very act of following a dream is a process that transforms you. When you do things to go after what you want in life, you encounter new experiences, you form new relationships, you discover new things, and then your dreams begin to evolve. Yeah. So you can't just follow your dreams, you have to let your dreams follow you. You have to upgrade your dreams in accordance with your own evolution, and that evolution is furthered by the choices that you make. So even if you think you know what you want to do for the rest of your life, you're probably wrong anyway. So the question is, what are my needs right now? What are my interests right now? And you optimize for those things, because as you acquire experience, as you develop skills, as you increase your self-knowledge, then opportunities will open up along with that. So people just put way too much pressure on themselves. Don't look for your soulmate. My colleague, Isaac Morehouse, who has a lot of great material at crash.co, he writes about career prep all the time. He says, just don't do stuff you hate, right? Just don't do stuff you hate. You don't have to find your passion. Just don't do stuff that you hate. If you can tolerate it just a little bit, that's fair game, because anything that you do is going to teach you valuable things. Yeah. It's going to give you valuable experience. It's going to make you more marketable, right? Totally. Like the content of what you do isn't as important as the context of how you do it and how you approach it. People don't get stuck because of their job. They get stuck because of poor habits and a lack of professional development. Yeah, it was funny. I've talked about it before on this podcast, but one of my, aside from being a professional baseball player, one of my dreams was to be a musician, to play, and I played in a rock band for years. And obviously that didn't pan out. Yeah. But think of the things that I was learning. I was learning to get on stage and perform. I was learning how to build an audience with a male. You have to bring people to the shows. Yeah. That's what I discovered. It's not about being a great musician. It's about having a fan base, building a fan base, building that. All those things that I learned about, a lot of it was about marketing and performing that I'm using now. Yeah. And this was really what I was called to do or meant to do, but that I would have never thought that there'd be a straight line between that to this, but there was. And you know what's funny, man, is that's how life actually works. So there's a guy named Jordan Harbinger who has a podcast called The Art of Charm. And we had him talk to our Praxis participants about his entrepreneurial journey. And when he was about like 2021, the only thing that he was interested in was pickup artistry, figuring out how to charm girls, which is how he got this podcast, The Art of Charm. So all of his articles, all of his podcast episodes, it was all about tips for flirting with girls, picking up women, things along those lines. That's what he was interested in at the time. You know negging? I haven't heard the term negging. What's
Negging
that?
is where, this is a horrible thing that these pickup artists teach. Negging is where you should start, especially if it's a very beautiful woman, not used to anybody criticizing her, you actually say like, your eyes would be great, but not with that shirt, or something like that. They're not used to hearing it. Anyway.
Yeah. So here's the falsehood in that, and here's the truth in that. The falsehood in that is that there's some sort of technique you can use that's going to cause another person to fall in love with you, right? And it's based on the fallacy that genuine desire can be negotiated. That's not true at all. You got to be yourself. You got to be authentic. But here's the truth in that. The truth in that is you're not going to get anywhere with anyone by trying to use agreement as a means of creating loyalty, right? To just placate someone or just say, oh yeah, I like everything that you like. You liked that movie? I like it too. Like people.
Is that one of the like manipulative techniques, is to like mirror their body language?
Well, I mean, I don't know if this is the argument that's given, but I imagine what this technique of negging is trying to counter, and it's countering it in a way that commits the opposite problem. But it's trying to encounter something that you actually do see quite a bit of in the dating world. And that's people throwing themselves at the feet of other people
so you're the
in an
first
effort to
person
win
who's
their love.
ever, for a beautiful woman, you may be the first person who's ever kind of told her no, or like not.
Let's be real, man. Like I've seen guys standing around talking. A pretty girl walks into the room, and every guy present just completely loses his composure and starts laughing at jokes that he doesn't
That's what
think is
people
funny.
don't realize is a beautiful woman is a celebrity.
Yeah,
bigger than any real celebrity at that moment.
So anyway, we were talking about the what were we talking about before the negging?
Well, I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned passion.
Passion,
And I wanted to ask you, I've heard you say experiment with curiosity rather than exploring passion. What does that mean?
So this idea of follow your passion or find your passion, people are worried about it everywhere. People are asking, well, what's my passion? I think I'm passionate about this, but if I were really passionate about it, I wouldn't have taken last weekend off. I wouldn't have neglected it for a year. And sometimes I love it, and sometimes I don't. And people trip themselves up because they treat passion like this cerebral thing. I got to find my one true passion, and I'm not sure if I've discovered it. And I say experiment with your curiosity because that's more visceral, right? It's non-dogmatic. It doesn't treat it like something that you have to commit to for the rest of your life. Just ask yourself, what are you interested in right now? What seems worth doing right now? Because that curiosity is like a superpower. It's the thing that's going to cause you to remember it all. It's the thing that's going to cause you to work really hard. And whatever you end up doing next, once your curiosities change, all of the valuable things you learn from your current curiosity are going to be transferable to that, right? And so this is what I was talking about because it connects. Jordan Harbinger, the art of charm, the pickup artistry guy. As he got older, his interests changed. I mean, a guy at 19 thinks very differently from a guy at 25 and a guy at 30, right? As he's getting older, he's starting to focus less on pickup artistry, and now he's caring about his own potential. Because one day he realized that what really matters in life is not trying to manipulate people into loving me, but learning to love myself, learning to be the best version of myself. And that's what I care about. And so now he started interviewing entrepreneurs. He started interviewing artists and people that were living interesting lives. And he said, at first he was afraid that all of those years of pickup artistry would kind of hurt his effort to transition into something that was more professional. And it was the complete opposite. Because even though he was focused on pickup artistry, he still had to network in order to get people to interview with him. He still had to learn good question asking skills. He still had to learn organization skills. He still had to exercise initiative in order to promote his podcast. And all of those skills were transferable. So as you move through life, your interests are going to change. Your curiosities are going to change. Why lock yourself into a particular passion now based on a cerebral process when you can just liberate yourself to do what you care about today and stop worrying about predicting what your 40-year-old self is going to like? Your 40-year-old self is going to be fine as long as you are committed to what you want to do today, because all skill is transferable. You just got to figure out how to do it.
One of the keys, I think what you're getting at here partly is like life is dynamic, the world is dynamic, and just keep getting ahead. Don't worry exactly about where you're going. And there's a microcosm that happened to me just recently, I invited, we had Michael Weir on, who was the faith-based initiatives for President Obama. He was on the podcast. We talked about faith.
Yeah.
And then he invited me to a dinner with Ravi Zacharias.
I love
and
Ravi.
I said yes.
Yeah.
And then because of that, now it looks like we're going to get to interview Ravi on this podcast, someone I would have probably never met had I not invited Michael Weir on. And then earlier, you and I were talking, and Ravi actually inspired you to get. And so it's funny from my standpoint. If I had tried to get to Ravi and have him on my podcast originally, I might not have gotten there. But activity begets more activity, and just get out there and do something. Don't sit around watching TV waiting for something to happen. If you get out there and start generating activity, sometimes good things just happen.
Yeah, if you think about it in your own life, usually the most interesting people are not the people who follow a linear path of saying, well, at age 6, I decided I wanted to be a neurologist, and I kept focused on that all the way till I was 30, and now I'm a one-dimensional human being who's only capable of talking about neurology. That's kind of a boring person, right?
Yeah.
The interesting person is someone that was interested in music at one time. They were interested in neurology one time. They were interested in this and that. And the interesting person is someone that can cross-pollinate ideas.
Yeah.
They can explain economics in terms of basketball, right? Because they have something else going on besides the thing they study. They can talk about philosophy in terms of music. When they discuss politics, they can discuss it through the lens of pop culture, or they can discuss it with an understanding of sociology or other things that people don't bring to the discussion. Whenever we pack the room to listen to someone that we deem to be interesting, it's because they're bringing something from another discipline that we typically haven't associated with that field. How do we get that? We don't get that by following linear paths. We don't get that by saying, I think I'm going to be interested in this at 50, so I'm going to study it now. We get it by following our curiosity.
As the son of a pastor, as I know you are, this is kind of how God works if you read the Bible a lot of times. The people that he uses, they generally don't follow all the, like, here's how to become head of Egypt or something, right? I mean, it's a very, in some cases, you would think that they're down and out. They've taken into slavery, and now they're in prison, but they're being prepared and learning things. It's not linear. It's not what you would plan.
Yeah.
His plan for your life oftentimes is not what you would actually plan out if you wanted to do it logically and rationally.
You're referencing Joseph there, and there's this misconception that Joseph knew what he was going to do when he was a child, and that's actually quite unlikely. If you read the biblical description of those dreams, they were highly symbolic. Those descriptions said nothing about Egypt. They said nothing about managing an economy, right? You had the grain, and you had the stars, and you had the one symbolizing his brothers, and he had an inkling that it had something to do with leadership or being in a higher position, but it's not exactly clear that Joseph knew how that would manifest. And it's quite possible that at different stages of life, he might have thought maybe this is it. He was the favorite son of his father. He was given the coat of many colors, but then his brothers tell a lie on him and they sell him into slavery. And now he's a slave. But while he's a slave, he gets promoted by Potiphar, and now he's put in a leadership position to watch over people. Oh, is this the fulfillment of the dream? Is it starting to happen now? But then there's a lie told on him. He's thrown into jail. And now he's in another terrible position. This is the total opposite of a linear path. But then he uses his gift in the place that he is in. He has every right to be bitter. He has every right to say I'm disadvantaged. He has every right to say life is working against me while he's in prison for something that he didn't commit. But he chose to do what he was good at in that context.
And
that's what resulted in him actually getting out of prison and going from the prison to the palace.
And he ends up saving his family
Yeah.
from starvation, which he could have never done a normal path. You say, speaking of dreams don't come true, decisions do.
Yeah. Dreams don't come true, decisions do. What that means to me is that life isn't going to give you a free pass for being creative or for being imaginative. Those are states of being. Those are attributes. And the universe doesn't care about your eccentricity. It doesn't care about how stylish you are or how fashionable you are or how imaginative you are. Your life is the product of what you actually do. It's not the product of what you feel or what you fantasize. It's what you actually do. And so if there's something that you want to realize in life, then you're going to have to take responsibility for making it happen rather than just expecting magic to occur simply because you have an awesome dream. Because when you die, the world won't remember you for your dreams. It will remember you for your decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know you don't talk a lot about politics overtly, but you talk about free markets.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you talk about your faith. Some of the organizations you're associated with could be considered libertarian / center right. I don't think you've talked about this much. As an African American, I think something like 95% of African Americans probably voted for President Obama. Doesn't mean that they're all liberal Democrats,
Mm-hmm.
but how do you? What do you? What do you
Yeah.
say to African Americans who say, like, why do you have this different worldview, this different philosophy?
So I would actually generalize this one, and I would say it's not just African Americans, but most people I know place an inordinate amount of faith in politicians, right? And we can parcel that out in many different ways. We can zoom in on the African Americans and say that undue faith shows up in the form of voting mostly in this direction. But even among white people, most of my white friends, I think most white people in this country get way too bent out of shape over politics, place way too much faith in getting the right person in office, and way too little faith in their own personal power. You know, Milton Friedman said that the search should not be for a good person to run the system, but rather a good system that incentivizes even the bad person to do the right things. And I think most people of all colors focus on the wrong things in that regard, right? So,
Right.
so I think this is a human problem. When it comes to black people in particular, though, I would say there are a number of things, though. I would say when you look at the message of the left and how it's articulated, I think it's very important, especially if you consider someone a political opponent, to respect the opponent, to acknowledge what they do well, to not be so blinded by jealousy or hatred or disgust that you lose your ability to acknowledge how they're fully capable of beating you. It's like if I'm on the basketball floor and you have a team of great shooters, I should be honest about that. You have better shooters than me. If I'm going to stop you, I got to be honest about that. Something that the left does very well is convey with emotion, passion, and empathy towards people's felt experience of oppression. And it doesn't matter if you think, well, that's an act. It doesn't matter if you think, well, their premises are wrong. This is one thing they do, and they do it very well. And that matters to human beings, especially when people are suffering or are identified with the experience of suffering. If you want to reach people, you have to make them feel seen and heard. Ravi Zacharias actually once said that once you've cut off a person's nose, there's no use in giving him a rose to smell. You have to capture people's heart before they care about what's in your head. It was John Maxwell who said that people don't care how much you know unless they know how much you care. Now, you can dismiss that as cheesy, and you can say, well, I'm not going to cater to people's emotions, and that's your right. But the question I would have for you is, do you want the person you're talking to listen to you? Because if that's what you want, then you should be selfish enough to talk to them in a way that increases the probability that they will give you what you want, namely that they will listen to you.
When I think the
the
answer
left
for
does that well.
conservatives would be to not to ignore millennials or young women who are not married or African Americans or Hispanics, but to offer them something. And I think the thing that conservatives can offer them is opportunity, in the sense of, I do believe that there are some government regulations that are good, but if they stifle creativity, if they stifle innovation and the entrepreneurial spirit and kill the dream, it could actually be impossible. There are countries. I remember one time I was speaking to a group of young French people who were visiting America, and I was telling them my story, and it was very convoluted how I got to where I am. And I was telling them, and so at the end I'm like, and so, to sum it up, it took me to the age of 30 before I discovered what my purpose is. So if you, and they're like 18 or 20, and I'm like, so if you're not there yet, don't worry, because you've got another decade to discover what you're supposed to do. And they said, no, you don't understand. In France, we don't get to find ourselves. You take tests, and this is not the Soviet Union, this is France. And you're in a track, and you're gonna be a lawyer, or you're gonna be a bureaucrat, but you don't have the ability to discover and rediscover and reinvent yourself. So one of the things we have to do from a political standpoint, I think, is preserve the ability for people to live their dreams. And I think that is an area where some progressive policies could stifle that.
Absolutely. So here's an important shift in rhetoric that I think needs to happen. So when you look at the political dialogue, what you will often see, particularly when you have people that identify with the experience of being oppressed or being victimized, is you will hear that being criticized. You're not a victim, right? Like, you're not a victim. You're not oppressed. Stop making excuses. So here's where I disagree with that. I actually think the state is a system of oppression. I believe that most of mankind's problems are not because of the constraints that exist in nature, but because of the artificial constraints that are introduced by government. More opportunities for wealth creation are hindered, not because people are born in poor homes, but because people's natural ability, people's instinctive ability to use creativity towards the generation of wealth is artificially constrained by all sorts of government regulations that pitch people on the idea that this is for the poor while actually hurting the poor. Thomas Sowell observed that you cannot evaluate a policy based on the intentions behind it, but based on the actual results, right? So I think instead of telling people you're not a victim, when their experience tells them, rightly so, that they are victims, we should change the rhetoric to, actually, man, you are a victim, but it's time to remember who the real enemies are. Let me show you who's really screwing you over, because your intuition serves you right.
I asked you about this before when you were on the podcast, but I think it's a good lesson. You say people should read 100 biographies.
So this is a piece of advice I got from Peter Daniels, who said, in the course of your lifetime, read 1,000 biographies.
1,000?
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
Because in doing so, you will build a vast vocabulary for overcoming incredible odds. Every problem that has been encountered in life has already been encountered, at least some variation of it, by thousands of people, right? And when you read, when you study the lives of other people, it gives you an improved ability to contextualize your own experience. Whenever people fall prey to self-defeating fallacies, it's usually because of this underlying assumption that I am experiencing this for the first time in history, that I am fundamentally alone, that I am the only one that kind of gets this problem, that I am the only one going through this sort of thing. And that is the beginning and end of defeat. But when you read, when you study the lives of other people, you develop a sense of, okay, this is actually normal. What I'm experiencing here isn't dramatic at all. And that's an important aspect of being successful, learning to not be too dramatic about your problems, because you see how it connects you to the rest of humanity.
I can tell you, when I started reading other people's biographies, the thing that becomes really clear, and Dale Carnegie talks about this when he tells the story of Abraham Lincoln, which is like failure after failure after failure after failure until he becomes president. But when you read people's biographies, people have become wildly successful. You find a ton of failures. They run for political office and lose. Theodore Roosevelt's wife and mom die on the same day. Failures and adversity and tragedy amongst the greatest people. It really does help to read those biographies.
Yeah, there's a quote that I'm going to get wrong, but I'll convey the point well enough. It says something along the lines of, if you tell me a truth, I will believe. You tell me a fact, I will know. But tell me a story, and it will live in my heart forever. There's something about the power of story that helps us hang on to a truth, but to see our place in the truth. Truth can't just be conveyed propositionally. The imagination must be captured in order for the heart to be invested. And that's what stories, biographies, can do.
Absolutely. Last time we talked a bit about you with Praxis. It's more part of your message is that college isn't necessarily for everybody, right?
Right.
No, if you want to be a college professor, you probably need to go. If you want to be a surgeon, you need to go to medical school.
Right.
But for a lot of people, it's not necessarily mandatory, and so maybe you could do an apprenticeship or something like that. I know Praxis does that. One question I had for you, is the college lobby after you?
I mean, if they are, I don't know.
There's nobody dedicated to stopping this message that you're spreading?
Yeah, so I mean, I can't speak on that, because if there are, I don't know, but I'm also the least likely to know, because when I have a dream or a vision, I don't focus on who's against me. I focus on what's before me and what I can do to make it happen. Because I don't believe in guarantees, it's all the more important for me to give myself the best chance of success by focusing on what I can control. So I don't care who my enemies are. I assume that I have them because I'm a human being, and I've never heard anybody that's been liked by everyone. And even if you are liked by everyone, that means someone's going to dislike you for that reason. So am I going to be the first guy in history that doesn't have any enemies? Probably not, but I don't care to know who they are. That's a waste of my time. I'm worried about the work. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling, right? Respect the creative process. Work.
Well, did I misrepresent your stance on college? I mean, right now, college costs hundreds of thousands of dollars sometimes, and you end up with all this student debt, and maybe your kids get indoctrinated into left-wing politics and progressivism while they're there. You are one of the people who've been kind of speaking out, not solely criticizing college, but saying, like, maybe we should rethink this a little bit.
Absolutely. So the way I see it is, we shouldn't treat college as if it's an exception to what we believe about literally everything else in the world, right? So you will never hear someone say, well, hey, the traditional cell phone worked for me. The computer that was the size of an entire room that cost $20,000 worked for me. Why do we need improved technology, right? Like, you don't hear people say, well, the taxi worked for my grandma. Why are you using Uber? We accept the fact that new tools, new technologies, new forms of knowledge create new options. And we get excited about the possibility of figuring out how we can bring these things together in a way to improve education. And so the idea that improving education is an insult to methods that worked in the past is absolute nonsense. Education is subject to improvement just like anything else. What a terrible world it would be if what was necessary for people to succeed 20 years ago was equally necessary today and equally necessary 10 years ago. That would be a tragedy. When I talk to people about college not being necessary, everybody agrees with me in theory. Everyone says, I like what you're saying, but unfortunately, there are still some people who want to see that degree. And my response to that is, well, at least you agree with me that that's unfortunate. So maybe you can work together with me to create a better world where people have more options, because at least we agree that a world in which there are many ways to signal value creation is better than a world in which there is only one way. But the whole thing about college is this: I'm credential agnostic. You're not special to me if you have a college degree. You're not special to me if you dropped out of college. What matters is that you're willing to create value. In the marketplace, wealth is a reward for creating value. It's about finding that intersection between what you can do well and how you can translate what you can do to solving problems for other people. That's all that matters. And there are lots of different ways that you can signal that. There are lots of different ways that you can develop those skills. And the Praxis apprenticeship is one way of going about that. And there are other people in the game doing that as well. But what matters is that you are goal-oriented, not that you are just mindlessly following a way of doing things because that's what the other people your age are doing.
So I solicited some questions on Twitter and Facebook. I've got one from each. Here's a Twitter question. What are the 3 most important things to include in every day for personal growth?
The 3 most important things to include every day for personal growth.
And I'll settle for 1.
Yeah. So, I'll give 1. And it may sound harsh, but forgive me for sounding harsh, but I really mean it. Some of the best life lessons might sound harsh on the surface. Develop the ability to ask great questions. The only way you're going to get anywhere in life is if you acquire great insights. And great insights are the product of asking great questions. I've heard it said once that the answer isn't difficult. Asking the right question is what's difficult. And when you have the opportunity to talk to someone with knowledge that's important to you, don't blow it by asking a vague question that fails to address the specificity of your need. Here's what I mean. I had someone ask me one time, hey, what's a tip for being successful? Fortunately for them, I didn't give them tips. Fortunately for them, I engaged them in Socratic dialogue. And I said, well, what is it that you want to be successful at? And this person said, I'm interested in graphic design. And I said, well, what are you doing right now towards that end? And they told me about different projects they're working on and so forth. And then I said, and what are you missing? And they said, well, I mean, I'm good at finding projects to work on, and I'm good at learning and taking online courses, but I just don't know anything about finding a good job in graphic design. And I said, so the question for you then is, how can I find a job in graphic design? They said, yes. I said, let's have that conversation. Now, those are 2 very different questions. The one we started with was, what are some tips for success? But the version of the question that met the specificity of their need was, how can I find a job in graphic design? Fortunately for them, I didn't answer the first question, because if I did, I would have given them something that wouldn't have been useful to them. It would have been something like, make sure you get plenty of sleep, make sure you eat healthy, read biographies of successful people, make sure you network. And this is what so much online self-help advice amounts to. You have people asking these really vague questions like, how do I deal with fear? How can I be successful? How can I find meaning? And before you ask that question, take some time to do the work and ask yourself, well, I'm not afraid of everything, so I'm not going to blow it by asking this person, how do I deal with fear? Because selfishly, that's going to get me something I don't want. They're just going to come back at me and say, oh, just feel the fear and do it anyway. Just try new things. Just be courageous. No. What are you afraid of? Be specific. You're not afraid to ask that question, so clearly you're not afraid of everything. What are you afraid of? I'm afraid of public speaking. Okay, now we've gotten somewhere. How can I develop the courage to give a speech? Now we've got something specific, and the insights you're going to get to that question are so much better than the insights you get to a vague question like, what do I do with fear? So my number one success tip is take the time to think about what success means to you and what specific form your problem takes, and translate that into a specific question, because that will get you a specific answer that meets your specific need.
Do you think it's laziness or a lack of introspection or a desire to ask a question that could be applicable to a general audience? Why is it that people ask these questions as I just did? Yeah, a vague question.
I don't think it's lazy. That's rarely my explanation for anything that people do. I think it's just we haven't been taught that way. It's just a lack of information. It's what we see in Praxis all the time. It's why we exist, right? Because it's not something that is taught in traditional schooling. In many ways, we're focused so much, we're conditioned so much, rather, to think in terms of getting the right answer that a lot of time isn't quite spent on getting the right question. This is critical thinking.
I actually think that
this is philosophy,
I actually think that with my children, that I force them to think about these things and to examine these things. And if you think about that, that's a real, talk about kids being privileged. Other kids have to come to you or your Praxis program to get this training. Some kids, if you think about it, it's probably better than having money in a way. If you have, from a young age, been trained to interrogate your premises and assumptions and look inward, that's a gift.
This is why philosophy is so great, man. This is why I was so excited when you said you're going to interview Ravi Zacharias.
This one's from Facebook. He writes, as an older guy trying to walk down an entrepreneurial path, how do I break a lifetime of bad habits and practices?
So first, take that older guy off, right? Because at the end of the day, you got to do what you got to do to become the person that you want to be. And don't use your age against yourself. Everything that can be construed as a liability can equally be construed as an asset. If you're older, maybe there are things you don't have that younger people have, but you have a lot of self-knowledge, you have a lot of experience, you have elements of stability in your life that can be used as an advantage. So that's the first thing. Look for the things in your life that can be construed as advantageous. That's going to help your self-esteem a little bit, help you be motivated a little bit. But I did a video, with the Foundation for Economic Education, I have a series of videos called Revolution of One. And one of those videos is about an idea I call non-zero days. And it's the idea of creating large changes through small habits. And the goal for each day shouldn't be to have a hero day where you swing for the fences and hit a grand slam, but just a non-zero day. Just don't let the day get away without doing one thing to make yourself better, one thing to make yourself smarter. I recommend that person read an excellent book by James Clear called Atomic Habits, because it goes into this a lot more deeply about habit formation and achieving your goals and changing your lifestyle. But my recommendation to that person is start small. So many people are afraid to start small because they feel like they're insulting their dreams, or they feel like they're just going to get stuck with mediocrity. But the people that get stuck are not the people who start small. It's the people who refuse to start at all because they think they need to start big. One habit at a time.
Yeah, it might have even been from Atomic Habits. I'm not sure. Maybe this was from the Minimalist podcast, but I heard somebody who said, don't start off, if you've never gone to the gym before, you shouldn't be like, I'm going to go work out today. Just what you should do is say, like, today I'm going to put on gym clothes and drive to the gym and walk inside and leave.
Yeah.
Just getting in the habit of actually walking inside the gym is a big enough step for day one.
Seriously, and it has massive psychological implications. If you set your goals up here, that means you're going to spend most of your time being somewhere other than here, right? But if you set these small goals along the way, it allows you to accumulate wins. And every time you accumulate a win, you increase your confidence in your ability to win. Like, you can't just talk yourself into thinking that you're a winner. You have to know what it's like to experience yourself saying, I'm going to do something, and then going out there and doing it. There's no substitute for that. So make that process easy for yourself. Don't try to be the best. Just keep doing better. And as you keep focusing on better, you'll move towards best.
Great advice, TK Coleman. Thank you for coming back on the news.
Good to be here.